Elena's childhood days. 1. The mansion on Willow Street. Elena was born the youngest daughter into the opulent Crestwood family, whose grand mansion stood as a symbol of wealth and prestige on Willow Street. The house, with its sprawling gardens, white pillars, and echoing marble halls, was the envy of the entire community. From the outside, the Crestwoods seemed like a picture-perfect family, always impeccably dressed and hosting lavish parties for the upper echelon of society. 2. Elena's first memories. From the very beginning, Elena's memories were tinted by a subtle chill that contrasted with her sunlit surroundings. She remembered her earliest birthdays: golden balloons, a mountain of expensive gifts, and a crowd of strangers, but always felt a sense of distance. Her own mother, Victoria Crestwood, would press a cold kiss to Elena's forehead, barely lingering. Elena's older sister, Bianca, always flawless, always in the spotlight, rarely acknowledged her existence except with a condescending smirk. 3. Subtle exclusions in everyday life. As Elena grew, the small slights became more noticeable. At breakfast, her mother would dote on Bianca, discussing her latest achievements or upcoming recitals, while Elena's attempts at conversation were met with indifference or swiftly redirected. Family vacations were meticulously photographed, but Elena was often cropped out or relegated to the back of group shots. Even in the privacy of their home, she was discouraged from speaking about her feelings or opinions, told to be quiet or let your sister finish first. 4. Relationships with household staff. Despite the emotional coldness from her mother and sister, Elena found quiet solace among the household staff. The kindly housekeeper, Mrs. Langley, would sneak Elena treats from the kitchen, and a gentle old gardener named Ben would let her help water the flowers. With them, Elena could laugh freely, climb trees, or get her hands dirty in the garden. Their warmth was a sharp contrast to the icy formality upstairs, and these moments became Elena's refuge. 5. Education and early passions. Though Elena attended the same prestigious private schools as Bianca, the expectations placed upon her were different. While Bianca was enrolled in every prestigious club and constantly pushed toward leadership, Elena was left to her own devices, her successes barely noticed. Yet it was in the quiet corners of the school library, or hidden away in her attic room, that Elena nurtured her passion for painting and literature. Her sketches and stories were never displayed in the family study, always packed away in secret boxes. 6. The unspoken family tension. The family rarely spoke of Elena's father, who was often away for business. When he was home, he was a warm, gentle presence, but his attention was constantly diverted by pressing matters. Elena noticed that her mother's countenance would tighten whenever her father tried to include Elena at the dinner table or complimented one of her drawings. Bianca sometimes imitated this behavior, offering performative sympathy while wielding it as another means to isolate Elena. 7. The seeds of loneliness and resilience. Night after night, Elena would lie in bed, listening to muffled laughter and bright conversation drifting up from the rooms below. Rooms she rarely felt welcome in. Though she yearned for acceptance and warmth, Elena learned early on to find comfort in solitude. She poured her yearning into journal entries and secret sketches, beginning to forge the quiet resilience that would soon become her strongest defense. 8. A portrait of contrasts. By the end of her childhood days, Elena had become an outsider in her own family. The Crestwood household glimmered with outward charm and laughter, but beneath the crystal chandeliers, a cold current of disapproval and exclusion shaped Elena's world. Even as she grew more aware of the unfairness surrounding her, she harbored a quiet hope. One day, things would change, or at the very least, she would decide her own fate. The silent sorrows. 1. The unseen wounds. Elena's pain did not erupt in dramatic scenes or bitter confrontations. Instead, it unfolded silently, day after day, in the quiet margins of her life. She learned to move quietly along the edges of her own home, retreating into corners and shadows whenever the temperature in the room signaled that her mother and sister's patience with her presence was thinning. The walls that encased her childhood were adorned with elegant portraits and golden sconces, but for Elena, they were more like the bars of a gilded cage. The people who should have cherished her most became the architects of a silence that stung deeper than any reprimand. 2. The invisible in daily life. At family dinners, Elena perfected the art of making herself invisible. She would listen as her mother praised Bianca for her violin performances, the conversation moving fluidly from academic accolades to holiday plans, never pausing long enough for Elena to add a word. Attempts to join in would draw little more than a distracted glance or, worse, a quiet sigh of annoyance. Sometimes Bianca, catching her sister's hopeful gaze, would cast a sly look as if to say, "You'll never belong." Journeys to school or outings became battlegrounds of subtle exclusion. Her seat chosen last, her opinions brushed aside, her victories at spelling bees or art contests treated as afterthoughts. 3. Behind closed doors. In the solitude of her attic room, the hurt blossomed behind closed doors. Elena found herself clinging to small comforts, a favored book, the scent of lavender from a hidden sachet in her dresser, clutching these tokens as proof that she existed, that she mattered, even if only in the privacy of her own space. At night, she would sometimes press her face to the cool window pane, watching the lanterns flicker in neighboring houses, wondering if warmth and laughter truly resided there, or if they were only an illusion beyond reach. 4. The weight of silence. One of the deepest scars was the way silence became a language in and of itself. Elena quickly discovered that voicing her hurts or desires offered no relief. On the rare occasion she gathered the courage to confront her mother about feeling left out, the reply was always muted, clipped, and dismissive. "Don't be dramatic," or "You're imagining things." After a time, she stopped trying. Her silence became armor. She would bottle up her questions, her need for comfort, and carry them with her like invisible burdens. 5. The mask of perfection. Outside the family, the Crestwoods maintained a pristine reputation. Elena was always impeccably dressed for church and public functions, expected to smile and appear as well-mannered as her sister. The contrast between public adoration and private neglect weighed heavily on Elena's sense of self. She learned to fake pleasantries, to offer practiced smiles for the benefit of neighbors and extended relatives, all the while feeling like an actor trapped in someone else's story. 6. Quiet acts of defiance. Though Elena often appeared meek, her soul simmered with a smoldering sense of injustice. She started to leave small traces of herself around the house. A sketch tucked beneath a vase. A poem slipped inside a forgotten book. These secret expressions became her silent rebellion, tiny assertions that she was here, even if no one cared to acknowledge it. Sometimes Mrs. Langley or Ben would quietly compliment her creativity, and those fleeting moments of recognition meant everything. Chapter 7. Yearning for affection. Above all else, Elena carried a quiet, desperate longing for affection. There were evenings she would linger at the staircase, hoping to catch even a fragment of her mother's laughter or her sister's praise. Occasionally, her father's absence seemed like the only thing that kept the household tension from boiling over, but when he was home, even his tenderness could not mend what was broken. Elena craved a single, genuine conversation, a moment of shared joy or vulnerability that never seemed to materialize. 8. The birth of resilience. Gradually, through these silent sufferings, Elena's resilience began to harden. What started as a need to survive the loneliness grew into an inner strength. She became more observant, sensitive to the moods and motivations of those around her, sharpening her intuition in ways she could scarcely understand. Each slight, every cold dismissal, became another stone in the foundation of her future resolve. 9. The glimmer of hope. Despite the pain, Elena was never overcome by bitterness. Somewhere deep inside, she held on to a fragile, flickering sense of hope, a hope that someday her voice would be heard and her worth recognized. The sorrows pressed upon her heart shaped not only her loneliness, but also a capacity for empathy and understanding, qualities that would one day guide her through far greater trials. The unexpected. Upheaval. 1. Dark clouds gather life within the Crestwood family, unfolded in its habitual silence and strain until a sudden, seismic shift rattled the very foundation of Elena's world. It began as a feeling, a sense of foreboding that lingered in the air, a coldness more profound than usual, whispers behind closed doors, and the absence of her father stretching longer with each passing day. Letters arrived, sealed in envelopes marked urgent, which her mother opened in hushed secrecy, eyes clouded and lips drawn thin. 2. The day everything changed. One crisp autumn morning, the news finally arrived. A telephone call that turned the grand halls of the mansion into corridors of sorrow. Elena's father, the only gentle presence in her life, had died unexpectedly during a business trip abroad. The announcement was carried not by a comforting embrace, but by her mother's tight, measured words. "Your father has passed. There are arrangements to be made." The world spun. Elena's knees buckled, but no arms caught her. Bianca buried her own tears behind a careful mask, while Victoria, ever stoic, began to manage the fallout with calculated efficiency. 3. Solitude amidst mourning. In the days that followed, relatives poured into the estate, friends, business partners, distant cousins. Elena barely remembered. The house was awash in black attire, whispered condolences, and the hollow performance of grief. Elena moved through the crowds like a shadow, invisible at her own father's funeral. She clung to his memory, the way his laughter had filled the rare evenings he was home, the times he had stood up for her, even when the rest of the family had not. Now, loss was her only companion, sharp and insistent in each room she entered. 4. The reading of the will. It was during this period of numb routine that the second shock arrived. After weeks of formalities and legal proceedings, the attorney finally came, his presence a grim portent, but also, unknown to Elena, a turning point. The family was called to the study. Victoria, Bianca, Elena, and a circle of sharp-eyed relatives. The will was retrieved from a locked briefcase and read aloud in a voice clear and emotionless. To the astonishment of all, Elena was revealed to be the sole legitimate heir. Her father's words, preserved in ink and law, left the entirety of his estate to my only blood daughter. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her mother's face went pale with disbelief, while Bianca's lips parted, not in protest, but in shock and growing resentment. 5. Seeds of doubt and distrust. Elena herself could barely comprehend the implications. Was this real? Had her father known about the way she was treated and sought to set it right from beyond the grave? Or was the truth of her family's tangled web even more complicated? The questions circled relentlessly in her mind, mingling with grief and a dawning sense of dread. She could feel the atmosphere in the mansion shift, her mother's polite composure hardening into steel, Bianca's forced cordiality icing over with envy. 6. The aftermath and isolation. Overnight, Elena became both a source of fascination and a target. She found her privacy increasingly invaded. Whispered conversations ceased abruptly as she entered a room. Her belongings were subtly rifled through, and she felt the unmistakable chill of being watched. Where once she had been ignored, now she was scrutinized, challenged. Her mother and sister, united by a common outrage, began to exclude her not only emotionally, but also from the countless decisions concerning the family's future. Chapter 7. The unraveling begins. While legal technicalities prevented them from outright denying Elena her inheritance, resentment simmered just beneath the surface. Victoria sought counsel from old acquaintances, lawyers, confidants, and former friends. Searching for loopholes, her manner quietly desperate. Bianca, meanwhile, vacillated between pleading for Elena's cooperation and making cruelly veiled threats, her own sense of betrayals feeding a dangerous ambition. 8. Elena's awakening. Amidst this upheaval, Elena, though battered by grief and confusion, began for the first time to sense a subtle shift within herself. The old wounds of neglect were still raw, but knowledge of her father's trust seeded something different, the beginnings of confidence. She realized that she was no longer just an outsider. She was now at the center of a storm that threatened to consume them all. The inheritance was not just wealth, it was also a responsibility and a key to understanding her own place in the family's labyrinthine history. 9. A new kind of loneliness. Though the will had altered her status in the eyes of others, it brought Elena little real comfort. If anything, her isolation deepened. Love was not suddenly given where there had only been apathy or scorn. The mansion that once served as her prison now became a battleground, one no less lonely, but fraught with new, invisible dangers. Yet as the chapter closed, one thing became clear. The tides had changed, and Elena, for the first time in her life, would have to decide how to answer the challenge fate had thrust before her. The search for truth. In the days and weeks following the seismic reading of the will, the grand Crestwood mansion became colder, even as autumn sunlight spilled through its tall, dust-flecked windows. Gone was any illusion of familial harmony. The air hung thick with suspicion and secrets. Every footstep echoed too loudly. Every hushed voice behind closed doors sharpened Elena's sense of dread and isolation. Yet, beneath the anxiety and grief, something new had begun to stir in Elena, a fragile urge to understand. For the first time, she was not content to remain an invisible observer in her own life. 1. Seeds of doubt. The first seeds of suspicion were sown by the will itself. The phrase, "my only blood daughter," haunted Elena at night, repeating in the quiet ticking of her bedside clock. She remembered her father as dignified and deliberate, never careless with words. So why had he chosen such specific language? Did he know something about Bianca? Or was it possible that Elena wasn't who she believed herself to be? One evening, as she gazed at her reflection in the ornate bathroom mirror, Elena silently catalogued the features she shared with her father. The arch of her brow, the dimple in her chin, the shade of her eyes. Everything about her had once felt secure, but now, doubt crept into even the smallest details. Was Bianca truly her sister by blood? Or was the gulf between them rooted in something deeper than favoritism? 2. Discreet inquiries. Determined to find answers, Elena began with what she could access. At first, it was harmless. She pored over old family albums and letters kept in the library's locked drawers. Photographs of her as a child always showed her lingering on the margins, but she noticed, for the first time, that Bianca's baby pictures were scarce and often cropped or distant. There was little evidence of Bianca's earliest years, at least compared to Elena's own. One morning, under the pretense of helping the housekeeper, Elena found an old shoebox of documents tucked high on a closet shelf. Inside were birth certificates, vaccination records, and a handful of yellowed postcards from her father's foreign business trips. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the brittle papers. Though she found her own birth certificate, issued at the local hospital with her parents proudly listed, she was surprised to discover Bianca's was different. The hospital name was from another state, and the mother's name had been amended. 3. Obstacles and resistance. Elena's investigations, though quiet, did not go unnoticed for long. Doors previously left ajar were now routinely locked. More than once, Elena entered a room to find her mother and Bianca in tense conversation, both abruptly falling silent when she approached. Victoria's gaze grew sharper, her questions more invasive. "Why are you spending so much time up here? What are you looking for?" Bianca, too, showed a new restlessness, a tension simmering beneath her practiced grace. She snapped at Elena more often, brushed past her in hallways with a forced smile that never reached her eyes. The staff, once kind, now seemed nervous in Elena's presence. Mrs. Langley, ever loyal to the family, offered vague assurances, never quite meeting Elena's gaze. Ben, the gardener, would only mutter in riddles about the past, never daring to say what he really thought. Elena began to realize that the silence in her home had not only been a product of neglect, but of fear. Fear that whatever secrets were buried might erupt and burn them all. Chapter 4. A confidant emerges. Desperate for allyship, Elena grew close to an unexpected confidant, Mrs. Langley's daughter, Alice, who worked part-time in the kitchen and was just a year her senior. The two had crossed paths only in passing before, but Elena sensed a quiet empathy in Alice. Carefully, Elena broached the subject of her suspicions, revealing what she had discovered about Bianca's unusual paperwork. Alice hesitated, but after a moment, she nodded. "There have always been stories, you know. My mother never says it straight, but sometimes at night, it's like she's afraid of the truth coming out. People notice things, even if they pretend not to." With Alice's help, Elena pieced together rumors of an affair, of a time before Elena's birth when Victoria disappeared for months. The puzzle was still incomplete, but for the first time, Elena felt she wasn't entirely alone. 5. Uncovering forgotten correspondence. With Alice keeping watch, Elena began to search rooms she had never dared enter before, including her father's study. There, nestled among business ledgers and dust-coated desk drawers, she stumbled upon a bundle of faded letters tied with a crimson ribbon. A woman's handwriting scrawled across envelopes dated 20 years ago. The letters revealed a clandestine relationship between Victoria and a man whose name Elena did not recognize. A passionate but ultimately destructive affair that predated both daughters' births. Clues within the correspondence hinted at hurried decisions, secret trips, and the possibility that Bianca's early childhood had been spent elsewhere, far from the Crestwood estate. One letter, in particular, mentioned a child caught between two worlds, which sent chills through Elena. 6. Confrontations and escalation. Elena's sudden withdrawal and newfound secrecy did not escape the notice of her mother. Victoria confronted Elena in the upstairs hallway on a stormy evening, her voice trembling with fury and fear. "Whatever it is you think you know, you should leave it alone. This family is held together by silence for a reason," Victoria hissed. Bianca, more desperate than angry, pleaded in the days that followed for Elena to stop her prying. "Let it go, Elena. Can't you see you're only making it harder on everyone? What are you hoping to find?" But Elena could not go back. Not after everything she'd seen and felt. Each attempt by her family to shut her out only strengthened her determination to know the truth. Days melted into restless nights, her thoughts growing sharper, her resolve stronger. She scrutinized every interaction, every slip of the tongue, every gap in their family narrative. 7. Disturbing discoveries. When Elena requested a copy of Bianca's birth certificate through official channels, posing as her sister for a school project, what arrived was another piece that didn't fit. Bianca's father was not listed. Equally troubling, the hospital listed was in a small town where, legend had it, Victoria had lived briefly under a false name. Piecing together old news clippings and whispered rumors, Elena began to suspect the truth. That Bianca's parentage was not only questionable but entirely constructed for appearances. The knowledge weighed on her. After all, she and Bianca were not just rivals for affection, but pawns in an elaborate facade. 8. The emotional toll. For all the momentum of her investigation, Elena was not immune to pain. The act of uncovering secrets came with its own kind of loss, a slow shattering of any remaining illusions about her childhood. The anger that once smoldered inside her now mingled with sorrow, even pity, for Bianca, whom she now saw as trapped in her own way. Elena realized that knowing the truth might bring neither closure nor reconciliation, only new forms of grief. 9. The step toward action. By late autumn, Elena was armed with more questions than answers, but also, at last, a sense of agency. With Alice's steadfast help, she began documenting everything she uncovered, determined that, no matter how her mother and Bianca schemed, the truth would not remain buried forever. As the chapter closed, Elena stood at the threshold of something greater than vengeance, her own becoming. Each revelation had cost her, but with every piece of the puzzle, her courage grew. The house itself seemed to groan under the weight of unspoken words, its walls trembling on the brink of a reckoning. Elena's journey for truth was far from over, and though she was not sure where it would lead, she understood now that to unearth the past was not just her right, but her destiny. The scheme to seize the inheritance. As November's chill set into the bones of the Crestwood mansion, a new tension gripped its halls, a tension born not only of loss or secrets, but of greed. With Elena's status as sole heir now indisputable, the opulent home became the stage for silent warfare. Gone was the pretense of family warmth. In its place festered calculated ambition and the gnawing fear of downfall. At the heart of it all were Victoria and Bianca. What they could no longer obtain through favoritism or manipulation, they now pursued by cunning and subterfuge. 1. A pact of desperation. Victoria's veneer of composure had cracked. Where once she glided through rooms with effortless grace, now she stalked the corridors late into the night, conferring with lawyers and making whispered phone calls from locked studies. The truth of Elena's inheritance had unsettled her deeply, fueling her resentment and fear. For the first time in years, Victoria and Bianca were truly allied. Not by love, but by desperation. Together, mother and daughter forged a pact. Elena could not be allowed to control the fortune, no matter the cost. Their conversations were clipped and urgent, full of unfinished sentences and furtive glances. "She doesn't have the strength for this responsibility," Victoria would say, her voice as brittle as dry leaves. "We'll protect what's ours." Bianca, her beauty sharpened by anxiety, nodded, trying to mask her envy of Elena's newfound importance. Underneath her performance of support for her mother, another emotion writhed unspoken, an old craving to be seen, finally eclipsed by her younger sister. 2. Subtle undermining. The campaign began quietly. The staff, once Elena's haven, grew wary. Her words misrepresented, her requests met with odd delays or polite refusals. Bianca started to accidentally misplace Elena's personal effects. A missing sketchbook here, a forgotten letter there. Victoria, ever the tactician, skillfully sowed doubts about Elena's abilities with close family friends and legal advisors under the guise of motherly concern. "She's overwhelmed," Victoria confided to the family's longtime solicitor, her eyes artfully downcast. "All these changes, so much responsibility at her age. Perhaps a co-trustee might be wise." Old aunts and uncles, never close to Elena, were quietly courted. Invitations were sent for urgent dinners, where Victoria played the gracious hostess and cast Elena as a naive, unstable girl lost in fantasy. 3. Setting traps. When quiet sabotage failed to rattle Elena, the scheme escalated. Bianca, leveraging her social reputation and charm, began to fabricate small scandals. She whispered to old friends that Elena had been behaving erratically, spending late nights out or entertaining unsuitable guests. Victoria kept detailed records of any minor lapse or mistake Elena made, an unpaid bill here, a misplaced document there, building a portfolio of supposed incompetence. Documents went missing from the family safe. A valuable piece of jewelry vanished from Victoria's vanity, only to be found days later in Elena's armoire. Each new mishap seemed minor in isolation, easy enough to dismiss, but together they began to form a subtle portrait of irresponsibility and deceit. Elena, knowing the truth, struggled to maintain her composure as her every move was scrutinized and twisted. 4. Attempts at manipulation. As legal deadlines for the transfer of assets approached, Victoria and Bianca shifted tactics yet again. They attempted to appeal to Elena's emotions, framing themselves as misunderstood and wounded. Victoria wept in the drawing room, recounting elaborate tales of her sacrifices for the family. "Everything I've done for you girls," she insisted, her eyes never quite meeting Elena's. Bianca tried a different angle, clinging to Elena with sudden affection, urging her to sign over temporary control of the estate while she adjusted. "We can make this easier, Elena," Bianca whispered late one stormy evening. "Just until all the paperwork's sorted. Don't you trust us?" But every gesture rang hollow, a mother's hug that was nothing but chilled silence, a sister's compliment delivered as if reading from a script. Refusing to be cowed or deceived, Elena responded with icy politeness, deflecting each ploy. Inside, she trembled with anger and a rising sense of agency. If anything, their efforts only strengthened her resolve to protect her father's legacy and herself. 5. gaslighting, and false accusations. When appeals and subtle sabotage proved ineffective, Victoria and Bianca's frustration boiled over into more overt aggression. They orchestrated incidents designed to make Elena doubt her memory and judgment. A banker called to say Elena's signature had authorized an expensive painting sale, though Elena had signed no such paper. Strange phone calls came late at night, threatening but untraceable. Worst of all was the public confrontation. During a Sunday brunch, surrounded by distant relations, Bianca tearfully accused Elena of threatening her in private. Victoria sided with her eldest daughter, their tale rehearsed and chillingly seamless. Shocked guests looked at Elena with thinly veiled suspicion. The family's myth of perfection shattered in whispers, blame shifted onto the unstable youngest daughter. Elena realized then the depths to which her family would descend to keep her in the shadows. 6. Turning the staff. Even the household's core figures, Mrs. Langley and Ben, were not immune to Victoria and Bianca's campaign. Mrs. Langley, whose loyalty to the family outweighed her care for Elena, began intercepting Elena's mail, reporting her conversations, and discouraging her from prying. Ben, the wise old gardener, averted his gaze when she entered the yard, afraid to jeopardize his employment. Elena's sense of isolation grew. Every ally, every inch of comfort, was methodically stripped away. 7. Legal maneuvering. Behind closed doors, Victoria met with attorneys, searching for any loophole in the will. Any way to question Elena's legitimacy as heir or to prove her unfit. Bianca trawled through their father's personal files, hoping to uncover a past indiscretion or contradiction. Threats of lawsuits, veiled at first, then more open, became routine. There were hints that outside forces might intervene if Elena could be proven unstable, that she might face not only financial ruin, but institutionalization. Every day, the pressure mounted, engineered to force her surrender. 8. Elena's endurance. Despite the mounting cruelty, Elena endured, fueled not only by fear and outrage, but by growing clarity. She kept meticulous notes, documenting every threat, every inconsistency, and every act of sabotage. Secretly, she shared her discoveries with Alice, the only confidant who remained. Elena's exterior was calm, but within, her determination hardened. She realized the only way to defeat her mother and sister was not just to withstand their games, but to outthink and outmaneuver them. The inheritance, she understood now, was not just a matter of money or pride. It was about justice, about claiming her right to exist, to be seen and heard, despite everything the family had done to erase her. As December's first snow dusted the grounds, Elena braced herself for what was to come. The game was far from over. Her adversaries were relentless. But so, now, was she. The turning point. Elena strikes back. The first snow of December blanketed the Crestwood estate in a deceptive, pristine silence, hiding the undercurrent of conflict that now seethed within its walls. Weeks of torment, silent battles, and quiet betrayals had left Elena battered but not broken. As Victoria and Bianca pressed their schemes with greater daring, Elena found strength in the very isolation that was meant to crush her. Where once she had retreated into resignation, now she gathered resolve, realizing that survival required more than quiet endurance. It demanded bold action. 1. Gathering evidence. Elena's awakening did not announce itself with rage or outburst, but with methodical purpose. She began to catalog every suspicious occurrence, every coincidence that seemed orchestrated to undermine her. Missing letters, altered bank statements, lies told to outsiders. Disguised as a habit of sketching and journaling, her notebook now became a trove of dates, times, overheard whispers, and observations about household comings and goings. She retraced the steps of her persecutors, the office where Victoria took her confidential phone calls. Elena discovered a forgotten notepad under a sheaf of documents, the impression of a phone number remaining after a page was torn away. In Bianca's gilded bedroom, she noticed receipts tucked into makeup bags, expensive gifts purchased on Elena's dime, signed out of the family account with forged initials. In the dust-choked attic, she found a bundle of discarded, threatening letters meant for her. Never sent, but each marked with hesitation in Bianca's elegant script. Each discovery stoked Elena's anger, but also clarified her resolve. As she assembled the pieces, a mosaic of deceit and greed emerged. Still, she knew evidence would mean nothing without a plan. 2. Strategic alliance. The household staff, once turned against her, remained at the center of household secrets. Remembering moments of past kindness, Elena reached out carefully. She left a small painting in the kitchen, her name signed boldly at the bottom, a silent invitation. Alice, Mrs. Langley's daughter, responded. "You shouldn't fight them alone," she whispered as she slipped a handwritten note into Elena's palm, confirming suspicions about Victoria's dealings, bribes delivered after hours, and lawyers paid from secret accounts. Through Alice, Elena learned more than she expected. Ben, the gardener, knew where the family's oldest files were kept, hidden in a locked chest in the cellar. Mrs. Langley, though cautious, admitted quietly that the truth would destroy them all, but perhaps it's time. And so, Elena's circle of confidants grew, not with dramatic declarations, but through cautious trust, each step reinforcing her emerging power. 3. Exposing the scheme. With her evidence secure, Elena devised a way to pierce the fortress of Victoria and Bianca's duplicity. She knew that direct confrontation would only create more denials and manipulation. Instead, she set a subtle trap of her own. One afternoon, Elena invited Victoria's most trusted family solicitor, Mr. Pennington, to tea under the pretense of needing guidance about her new responsibilities. Calmly, she presented select documents, the altered bank withdrawals, copies of emails arranging underhanded transfers, and records of assets quietly siphoned from the estate. "It seems there's confusion about these transactions," she said, voice unwavering. "Would you help me understand what's happening?" Mr. Pennington, a practiced man of law and discretion, first deflected but soon recognized the depth of her proof. "Miss Elena, these are serious matters. They may require formal investigation," he replied, his measured tone the first signal that the tide was shifting. The next day, wordlessly, Victoria found herself locked out of several key accounts. Bianca's credit cards were suspended. Inquiries from the bank began to pile up. They confronted Elena in the grand foyer, their faces masks of outrage and disbelief. But Elena held her ground, the weight of evidence and Pennington's newfound support behind her. "I will not be threatened or deceived any longer," she announced, for once the center of her own story. 4. Confronting the past. Striking back was not just about reclaiming money or social standing. In the shadowy rooms of the past, Elena confronted the deeper truths she had unearthed. Her mother's lies about paternity, the web of affairs, and Bianca's own origin. Late one night, Elena summoned her mother and sister to her father's study, her voice steadier than she thought possible. "I know about the hospital records," she began, producing the birth certificates and carefully documented inconsistencies. "And the secret trust funds, the hidden trips, the bribes to silence the staff. The time for secrets is over." Victoria's look of icy authority faltered for the first time. Bianca stared at the floor, jaw clenched in denial and shame. Elena did not gloat, nor did she yield to anger. Instead, she spoke with a clarity born from years of invisibility. "If you continue, I will go to the authorities. I won't let you ruin our father's legacy, or destroy what little is left of this family's name." 5. The power of truth. Word of the Crestwoods' unraveling began to seep through the local elite. Gossip trickled into dinner parties and charity boards. Yet, despite the mounting scandal, Elena felt lighter, more certain of herself than ever before. The truth, long stifled and hidden, proved disruptive not just to her enemies, but to Elena herself. With each step away from victimhood, she discovered the hard cost and the deep necessity of self-assertion. She protected her documentation with care, sending copies to the family attorney and storing duplicates in the bank's vault. For the first time, advisors spoke directly to her, not through Victoria or Bianca. Servants greeted her with subtle nods of respect. Alice became a steadfast friend, offering support as the storm inside the mansion intensified. 6. Rising above retaliation. The battle was not won without cost. The isolation deepened as Victoria and Bianca refused to speak except to defend themselves. Elena's conscience ached with the knowledge that her actions tore at the last remnants of her family's unity. Yet she recognized something vital. Self-defense was not cruelty. Justice demanded sacrifice. Determined not to become the same as her adversaries, Elena drew boundaries sharp and clear, but did not order her mother or sister thrown out. Instead, she established rules: transparent accounts, independent audits, legal oversight for estate transactions. It was not forgiveness, but accountability. It was, in its own way, the beginning of healing, not for the past, but for the battered integrity of the Crestwood name. 7. A new beginning. With winter setting in, Elena finally allowed herself to walk the gardens again, head held high. The path she had chosen was lonely, but every step had been hers. She was no longer fighting for validation or love she would never receive, but for her father's belief in her, and ultimately for herself. Where the old Elena would have faded into the wallpaper, the new Elena faced the storm and found herself within it. She understood the legacy left to her was more than material. It was the power and the cost of telling the truth. The war for the Crestwood estate was far from over, but for the first time, Elena was neither pawn nor victim. She was, at last, the author of her own fate. The unveiling of secrets. In the weeks that followed the dramatic upheavals at the Crestwood estate, the tension that once hovered unspoken in the air thickened into something unavoidable, an oncoming storm for which there were no more safe corners. The fragile status quo that had governed the family for so long lay in ruins. Now, with Elena holding both the legal and moral upper hand, truths long buried could no longer be contained. The time had come for the entire web of lies, half-truths, and family lore to be dragged into the harsh, cleansing daylight. 1. Cracks in the facade. It began with rumors, small at first, but gaining momentum like falling snow gathering into an avalanche. The mansion's staff, once commanded to silence, began to whisper among themselves, emboldened by Elena's new authority and the fear that Victoria's reign was rapidly ending. Letters arrived daily from relatives, business partners, and curious outsiders, each with questions, condolences, or demands for explanation. The Crestwood family, once the town's paragon of class and discretion, found themselves the subject of gossip, suspicion, and even scorn. Elena, ever cautious, understood that the real danger did not lie in external judgment, but in what these revelations would accomplish inside the family's already fractured core. Still, she persisted. Day by day, she assembled evidence, timelines, and eyewitness accounts, determined that when the truth came, it would not be piecemeal or easily denied. 2. The Family Summit. On a gray morning, heavy with winter's threat, Elena called for a family meeting, a summit of all those left whose lives had been shaped by Crestwood secrets: Victoria, Bianca, the remaining core staff, the estate's solicitor, and a handful of distant relatives. One by one, they arrived in the grand parlor, expressions guarded, motives various. Bianca tried to appear poised, but she could not hide the tremble in her hands. Victoria's mask of authority had slipped, replaced by a nervous, weary resignation. Elena stood tall at the head of the table, dossier in hand. She began by laying out the facts, calmly, systematically, her voice clear and resolute. She presented the correspondence that illuminated Victoria's affair years prior to either daughter's birth, the forged and amended documents that created a false narrative about Bianca's parentage, and the financial records showing years of mismanagement and cover-up. 3. Each secret revealed. There was silence after her opening salvo, a silence so taut that the ticking of the ancient clock on the mantel sounded deafening. The secrets, once thought to be locked away forever, came tumbling out as evidence and witness testimony stacked higher and higher. Mrs. Langley, the housekeeper, confirmed overhearing whispers between Victoria and a mysterious visitor in the night, years past. Ben, the gardener, recalled seeing Bianca return to the estate as a toddler, after a long absence during which Victoria had explained that the child had been sick and away. The solicitor detailed how Victoria had attempted to siphon off trust funds and use complex shell accounts to mask the family's dwindling fortunes. Alice, Elena's ally, provided corroborating stories about threats to staff should anyone speak out, and about the emotional manipulation used to ensure silence. Most explosive of all was the truth about Bianca's birth. Torn hospital records from a distant state, a hastily arranged baptism under a different surname, and confession letters from Victoria's youth finally pieced together a story everyone feared to speak. Bianca was not the biological child of Elena's father, the late Mr. Crestwood, but the product of Victoria's affair. The phrase in the will, "my only blood daughter," rang with newfound clarity and unavoidable consequence. 4. Emotional fallout. The admissions landed like blows. Bianca, who for so long had clung to her role as Crestwood, heiress, sat frozen, the color draining from her face as each new piece of evidence stripped away her sense of identity. For a moment, she tried to deny it, her voice faltering. "There must be some mistake, some misreading." But even her mother could not meet her gaze. Victoria, once so composed and untouchable, sobbed quietly, the price of her secrets written in the lines of her weary face. Among the staff, the revelations brought relief and fear in equal measure. Relief that truth had finally come out, fear of reprisals and uncertainty about the estate's future. Among the assembled relatives, reactions ranged from outrage to bafflement. Some saw opportunities for old grievances to be aired. Others simply gawked at the collapse of a public image they could never attain themselves. 5. The public reckoning. No family turmoil could remain private in the age of ceaseless rumor. News spilled quickly through the town, as it always does with the powerful. At first, genteel society's reaction was cautious, but over the next days, the reaction sharpened into censure. Old friends distanced themselves. Invitations evaporated. Local papers ran sympathetic but damning pieces, probing the saga of deceit and inheritance at Crestwood. Public support for Elena grew, particularly when it became clear she was not acting in petty vengeance, but seeking redress for a lifetime of exclusion and manipulation. For Victoria and Bianca, however, the reckoning was harsh. Victoria's social circle withered. Former friends turned away at church, her charitable causes quietly dropped her name. Bianca faced the worst of it, schoolmates suddenly ignoring her, their parents recoiling from scandal. The ordeal was not only a material fall from grace, but a profound psychological exile. 6. Elena's calm authority. Throughout it all, Elena remained an anchor in a suddenly tumultuous world. She kept her responses measured, declined public interviews, and worked with the family's lawyers to ensure legal matters were handled with transparency and respect for all parties, especially the staff, who had suffered under years of forced complicity. Her greatest battle was internal, wrestling with pity for her shattered sister and broken mother, balancing justice with mercy. Yet for the first time, her decisions were acknowledged, not as accidents or acts of rebellion, but as the legitimate authority of the Crestwood heir. Alice, ever loyal, became her confidant and advisor, offering gentle encouragement and steadying wisdom as Elena confronted each wave of fallout. 7. Aftermath and glimmers of healing. The days following the revelation were marked by a kind of stunned quiet across the estate, as if the house itself was trying to absorb the impact of so many truths unveiled. Victoria retreated into herself, seeking solace with lawyers and the last of her allies. Bianca drifted in a daze, uncertain whether to rage or beg forgiveness, at last forced to confront the emptiness her mother's ambition had left inside her. For Elena, though, the end of secrets marked the beginning of something new. She mourned the loss of a family dream that had never existed as she imagined. But she also began to consider the future, not just as an individual, but as a leader with the power and responsibility to reshape what the Crestwoods would mean to the world. The mansion brimmed with uncertainty, but for the first time, hope, shy and uncertain, drifted through its halls. Elena walked the corridors not with the tentative steps of an outcast, but as the architect of her own restoration. The curtain had been lifted. What happened next would be up to her. Collapse and remorse. Winter descended in stark, icy waves on the battered Crestwood estate. The snow muffled the usual sounds of the household, blanketing scandal and sorrow alike beneath a heavy silence. All around, the traces of a once exalted family seemed to dissolve. Pride, tradition, even the illusion of loving unity. Where laughter and gossip had once flitted through the polished halls, only echoes of recent revelations remained. 1. The unraveling of power. With every day that followed the full unveiling of the family's secrets, Victoria's world shrank. Letters from old friends and donors to her charitable causes now went unanswered or returned with cold civility. The clubs and societies that had once welcomed her presence quietly dissolved their ties. Invitations ceased, and her name was stripped from event programs, erased from elegant donor walls. Legal notices and summonses arrived in their place. Investigations into fraudulent transactions, frozen accounts, queries from bewildered former partners. Her meticulously curated life, built on image and control, disintegrated in public disgrace. Victoria's regal posture gave way to a haunted hunch. Each new day brought interviews with stern-faced lawyers and conversations with scandal-hungry reporters tipped off by former confidants. She watched helplessly as the reputation she had guarded so jealously was dissected by those who had once envied or admired her. 2. Bianca's downfall. If Victoria's fall was marked by legal woes and social ruin, Bianca's was intensely personal. The young woman who had walked through life with certainty, her beauty and status shielding her from consequence, now found herself ostracized. Her university sent an official letter stating that her scholarship, awarded on the basis of her Crestwood name and supposed lineage, would be suspended pending review of her records. Friends grew scarce, their texts full of hollow apologies or veiled accusations. Those who once flocked to her parties avoided her eyes in the cafe, their whispers trailing in her wake. Bianca tried to fight the tide at first, denying, arguing, even lashing out at those who confronted her. But denial gave way to exhaustion. Lying awake at night, the walls of her room seemed to close in, filled with the ghosts of entitlement and insecurity. Days blurred together as she wandered aimlessly through the nearly silent mansion, longing for her mother's guidance, blaming Elena, and, in rare lucid moments, herself. 3. Facing legal and financial consequences. The family's finances, once seemingly endless, were now exposed as a labyrinth of debts, shell companies, and mismanaged funds. Lawyers representing creditors filed suit, and court dates loomed. The estate was suddenly vulnerable to seizure. Valuable artwork and heirlooms once displayed with pride were catalogued for potential auction. All the while, Victoria and Bianca argued in tight, desperate voices about blame and next steps. The very fabric of their relationship, barely held together by shared secrets, now unraveled under the weight of shared ruin. Outside, media vans gathered near the end of the long drive, reporters hoping for glimpses of the once mysterious Crestwoods, now infamous. Elena, who had grown used to being invisible, was forced to navigate this carnival of attention, not as a star, but as the one left standing in the aftermath. 4. Elena's emptiness. Yet victory brought Elena little satisfaction. In moments of solitude, she often pressed her hand to her chest, searching for a sense of triumph that never came. She wandered through rooms now cluttered with legal folders and discarded mementos of a crumbling past. In the evenings, she stared out at the frozen grounds, winter wind rattling panes as she tried to make sense of hollow justice. Remorse seeped in, less for the exposure of wrongdoing than for the collapse of any possibility for reconciliation. Elena mourned not for the crestfallen facades her mother and sister wore now, but for the warmth and acceptance she had chased through so many empty years. She questioned, sometimes bitterly, was her determination to seek the truth worth the devastating cost? Had she inherited only loneliness? Chapter 5. Confronting the shared past. Amidst the turmoil, Elena attempted to talk to Victoria and Bianca, hoping against reason to salvage some form of kinship. Conversations were brief and tense. Victoria, once eloquent, spoke in clipped phrases, her pride too wounded to allow for apologies. "We did what we had to," she murmured one late afternoon, staring out a frostbitten window. "Some things are best left forgotten." Bianca was alternately sullen and explosive. When confronted one night with Elena's offer of peace, she spat, "You think this makes you better? You don't know what it's like to have everything pulled out from under you." Tears glistened in her eyes, a mixture of resentment and heartbreak for a future she felt stolen. Elena wanted to comfort her, wanted, even after all the manipulation and years of being overlooked, to bridge the gap between them. But each attempt fell flat, silenced by years of resentment and the reality that truth, once unleashed, could rarely heal old wounds quickly. 6. Fragile steps toward understanding. Time passed in bizarre stillness. The family's lawyer brokered settlements. Auctions were scheduled. Court mediation required the presence of all 3 remaining Crestwoods. Forced into proximity, Elena, Victoria, and Bianca learned to coexist in frigid civility, communicating only when necessary. It was far from resolution, but neither was it outright war. Occasionally, cracks formed in the ice. One morning, Elena found Bianca in the unused music room, silently turning the pages of an old photo album. Instead of withdrawing, Elena sat beside her. After a long, wary pause, Bianca whispered, "Dad really did love you. I was jealous. I thought if I was perfect, maybe he'd care for me too." It was a confession, small but genuine, and for the first time, Elena saw her sister as something other than a rival. They sat in quiet, shoulder to shoulder, both changed, both scarred. Chapter 7. Searching for Meaning in Ruin. As snow continued to fall outside, the mansion's echoing emptiness became a symbol for everything lost and everything left to rebuild. Elena continued her daily routines, overseeing legal matters, responding to letters, trying to salvage what she could of the estate. She began to pay careful attention to the staff, ensuring none were left destitute by the fallout, determined to close the chapter differently from how it had begun. Some nights, she composed unsent letters to her father, sharing her doubts and regrets, searching for forgiveness or guidance she knew would not come. In the darkness, she recognized that winning had come at the cost of something irretrievable: innocence, hope, the dream of family harmony. 8. Acceptance and moving forward. As the legal proceedings drew to a close and the world's attention faded, Elena found herself alone at the heart of a story that felt both tragic and transformative. She did not feel victorious. She felt emptied, yet ready to rebuild. The mansion, wounded but standing, embodied her own battered soul. In its sprawling, half-lit rooms, Elena saw the possibility, however faint, of someday finding peace, of honoring both the love and failures left behind. Peace after the storm. The world outside the Crestwood mansion had moved on by the time winter's grip eased. Snowbanks melted, giving way to patches of tentative green. The air was softer, the harsh winds of months past replaced by a tentative, searching breeze. Within the old estate, too, change came slowly, subtle at first, but insistent, as if nature itself was determined to thaw even the deepest frost. 1. Quiet restoration. Elena rose before dawn most mornings, drawn by the silence and the sense of opportunity it offered. The mansion was both emptier and, paradoxically, more alive. Where once she might have heard only the distant echo of strained conversations or muffled arguments, now the hush was peaceful, broken only by birdsong or the gentle cooing of wood pigeons in the Ohio. Eaves. She had begun, carefully and methodically, to restore the place with her own hands, not through grand gestures, but through small acts, tending to neglected flower beds, airing out rooms heavy with old memories, patching peeling wallpaper. Sometimes Alice, ever loyal, joined her. They worked in companionable quiet, sharing simple lunches in the kitchen while sunlight streamed through newly washed windows. The staff, what few had remained after the turmoil, watched Elena's efforts with growing respect. For the first time, she asked their advice about repairs, listened to their stories, and ensured wages were fair and paid promptly. The air of fear and uncertainty that had hung around the household seemed to dissipate. Laughter, tentative at first, slowly returned to mealtimes. 2. Healing wounds. Victoria was gone, having retreated to a modest apartment in another part of town. She made no move to reconcile, her pride still a protective shell, but occasionally word reached Elena through lawyers or mutual acquaintances. Her mother was coping, if not rebuilding. Bianca, meanwhile, stayed on at the estate for a few months after the dust settled. The sisters were polite, but wary, two casualties of the same storm, each grieving in her own way. It was Alice who encouraged them to speak. One drizzly afternoon, as rain pattered against the high windows, she left them alone in the sunroom. At first, silence reigned, Elena looking out at the mist, Bianca nursing a cup of tea. Then, abruptly, Bianca laughed, bitter but genuine. "We're ridiculous, aren't we?" she said, shaking her head. "All these years, fighting over scraps of love from people too damaged to share it." They talked for hours. Apologies came haltingly. Bianca confessed how lost she felt, having built her identity on a fiction. How she missed their father and envied the quiet solace Elena had always managed to find away from society's gaze. Elena, in turn, admitted her own jealousy and loneliness, the pain of being invisible even as she tried desperately to belong. The wounds between them did not heal overnight, but cracks appeared in the armor of old resentments. The next day, they worked together in the kitchen, sharing old family recipes neither had made since childhood. Their laughter sounded strange, almost foreign, in those echoing rooms, but carried with it the awkward sweetness of possibility. 3. Finding purpose. Elena began to consider what true stewardship of her inheritance might mean. The mansion, once a monument to pride and exclusivity, now struck her as both a burden and a canvas for something entirely new. She envisioned its rooms filled not with secrets, but with music, warmth, and creativity. Perhaps an art workshop for underprivileged children, or a reading space for the local community. She started small. With Alice's help, she hosted Saturday art afternoons in the largest, sunniest parlor. Local children, unfamiliar with the grandeur of the estate, soon felt at home amid scattered paints and laughter. Neighbors who had once watched the house with suspicion now dropped in with pies and books, curious about this transformation from fortress to gathering place. For Elena, these moments brought a fulfillment she had never felt during her years chasing approval. No longer did she measure her worth by disapproving glances or public accolades. Now she found joy in a child's delight at seeing their drawing displayed on the old mantelpiece, or in a moment of quiet with Alice in the garden as the late sun painted the sky. 4. Accepting imperfection. Peace, Elena discovered, did not mean the absence of sorrow. There were quiet days when grief crept in. Holidays spent remembering her father, letters from Victoria that arrived without warmth, Bianca's silences that lingered too long. Some memories refused to fade. The sting of betrayal or the bitter loneliness that had once defined her world. But slowly, she learned to welcome these feelings as gentle reminders of how far she had come. Elena also forgave herself. She stopped reliving every harsh word, every choice made in desperation. The past, she realized, could not be changed, but its lessons could inform a kinder, more resilient future. She wrote letters she never sent, filled sketchbooks with images of healing and release, and let herself dream, tentatively, of happiness on her own terms. 5. Redefining family. Spring brought gradual reunions. Bianca, having moved into a rented cottage in town, returned some weekends to walk the gardens with Elena. Their conversations grew easier. They spoke about their father sometimes, about their childhood from each sister's vantage point, and even about Victoria, who remained a ghost on the edge of their story. There was no grand reconciliation, but there was honesty, a shared willingness not to repeat the old cycles of silence and denial. The estate, once haunted by shadows and divided loyalties, now welcomed new faces. Alice's mother visited, no longer nervous. Ben, the aging gardener, returned to show a group of children how to plant bulbs in the spring. The walls, scrubbed of their secrets, seemed to breathe easier. 6. The peace within. On her quietest days, Elena walked the border of the estate alone, letting the breeze tangle her hair and sunlight warm her cheeks. The world still whispered the Crestwood name, but she no longer flinched from it. Her identity was no longer built on wealth, legacy, or family approval. It was founded on things harder to see but far more lasting: compassion, resilience, self-acceptance. She stood on the steps of the mansion one evening, watching the sunset pour gold over the fields. The silhouette of the estate stood strong against the horizon, battered by storms but upright still. Elena rested her hand against the ancient stone and closed her eyes in quiet gratitude. She could not change the past, nor could she erase all pain. But, in the gentle hush after the storm, she had found something she could claim as her own. She had found peace. Not absolute, but enough. And with it, the freedom to shape her life and the Crestwood's future on her own terms. Epilogue. Looking back and moving on. The passage of time in Crestwood's halls was no longer marked by the echo of old resentments, but by the steady rhythm of renewal. Sunlight poured freely through the windows now, illuminating both the faded scars of the past and the promise of days yet to come. It was only as the last spring flowers bloomed, and with them, the trees in the overgrown orchard across the lawn, that Elena realized how far she had traveled from the shadowed girl she once was. 1. A different dawn. Mornings began with quiet purpose. Elena no longer hid herself away, nor did she linger on the edges of her own home. She rose to the song of birds, her footsteps light on polished floors as she made her way through open doors and sunlit corridors. There was work to be done, of course. The estate required constant attention, and her new community projects meant a steady stream of people passing through the gates. But the pace was her own. As she moved about, she often paused to admire small changes. A burst of wildflowers in the garden, laughter echoing from the study where village children painted on scrap canvas, the faint aroma of fresh bread from Alice's kitchen. Loneliness, once an omnipresent ache, had become a gentle solitude, something soft rather than sharp, a space she entered by choice and never for long. 2. Reflections on loss and growth. The scars of recent years had not faded easily. There had been moments, quiet and searing, when regret threatened to swamp her, when she doubted the value of her resilience. She remembered vividly the nights spent wandering frost-bitten halls or writing confessions to her absent father. Sometimes she still found herself tracing these old wounds in memory, especially after an unexpected letter from her mother or a tense visit from Bianca. Yet Elena had learned to honor her pain without letting it define her. Every loss, a parent's love, a sister's affection, the innocence of childhood, had carved out new space for empathy, understanding, and authentic strength. She began to see that her hardest trials had also shaped her greatest abilities: discernment, patience, compassion. By facing the bleakest truths about her family and herself, she had learned to see people, not as heroes or villains, but as flawed, hopeful beings worthy of kindness. 3. The choice to forgive. Perhaps the most difficult transformation of all was the choice to forgive. Not to excuse what had happened, but to let go of the desire for vengeance or restitution. Elena found, over countless reflective evenings, that forgiveness was a process, sometimes gentle, sometimes grueling. It began with her mother. Victoria's exile in town remained self-imposed. The two exchanged only brief, formal notes at first, apologies carefully hedged, gratitude expressed more from duty than affection. After months of stilted silence, Elena visited. They sat across from one another in Victoria's neat, modest apartment, the air thick with unfinished sentences. "We made mistakes," her mother finally said, voice trembling. I thought I was protecting you girls, when all I did was build walls. And for the first time since childhood, Elena saw the vulnerability behind Victoria's defenses. She answered honestly, "We all lost something. I hope we can remember what mattered, not only what went wrong." Bianca, too, re-entered Elena's life, haltingly. A series of short visits turned into longer stays. They tackled estate repairs together, swapped memories of childish fights and secret hideouts in the attic, and sometimes they drew apart, each reckoning with their grief in solitude. One misty evening, Bianca confessed, "I always wanted to be seen. I never realized you did too." The realization bridged the space between them, if not perfectly, then honestly. 4. Redefining family and belonging. As seasons cycled from spring to sun-drenched summer, Elena found herself at the head of a new kind of family, not only by blood, but by choice and circumstance. Alice became much more than a friend. She was a collaborator, confidant, and surrogate sister. The staff, those who had weathered the storm and those newly hired, worked together as a true team, supported rather than dictated to. The estate itself evolved. Rooms once reserved for display opened to the community. Old studies became music rooms or libraries. There were holiday gatherings now, not lavish affairs to impress outsiders, but heartfelt celebrations where neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives felt welcome. The walls that had once held so many secrets now rang with conversation and music, and Elena delighted in filling the silence with new history. 5. Legacy and future vision. In claiming her inheritance, Elena came to understand legacy as something wholly different than what her parents had prized. It was less about preserving perfection, more about nurturing resilience and welcoming change. She framed her stewardship around acts of service, scholarships for local children, workshops for the marginalized, a fund for the continued maintenance of both the mansion and the lives connected to it. Frequently, she found herself counseling young people in the village, listening to their troubles and dreams. She discovered joy in encouraging their ambitions, hoping each would carry forward the lesson she had learned, that self-worth was built not from approval, but authenticity. Elena wrote these insights into her private journals, uncertain if anyone would ever read them, but feeling nonetheless that each entry was an act of faith in the future. 6. Final reflections and moving forward. One warm evening, Elena wandered out to the old orchard her father had loved. The trees shimmered with new leaves, and the air hummed with the promise of summer. Sitting on a bench beneath the canopy, she allowed herself to remember everything: the heartbreak, the years of longing, the victories and defeats. For the first time, she did not feel overwhelmed by the past. Instead, she felt grateful. Every winding road had led her here. She understood, at last, that her story was not about overcoming others, but about embracing her own path and identity. She forgave herself for the years spent doubting and hiding, for all the ways she had survived. The mansion might bear some scars forever, as would her heart, but both could become vessels for wisdom, kindness, and hope. As twilight settled over Crestwood, Elena stood and walked back toward the house, her haven, her own creation out of ashes. She had endured, she had grown, and now she would move on, with purpose, not regret. With every step, she silently thanked the girl she had been, even as she stepped boldly into who she had become.